Salutations and welcome to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today on the podcast, we are so excited to welcome back to the show author, practicing occultist, and Hermetic Magician, Frater Ashen Chassan. What a truly great podcast we have for you today. Frater Chassan opens up with honesty, humor, and as always, he shares great wisdom on a variety of topics. We talk about follow-up since the release of his latest book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow. Frater weighs in on also why you might think twice before attempting an evocation in just jeans and a t-shirt. He also talks about the uncanny relationship between the martial arts and magic and those shared elements. And we also talk about odd love spell requests that Frater's getting and how people need to take personal responsibility for their actions. And Frater also shares some truly sublime advice on the true importance of facing, embracing, and overcoming adversity. And he also talks about, how basically every grimoire promises to confer great material or spiritual powers through the spirits in the grimoire. Well, Frater shares about how that actually can come to pass in a magician's life for real. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Frater Ashen Chassan. Frater Chassan, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us again on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
How have things been going since the release of Gateways Through Light and Shadow, Frater? Have you noticed some pretty positive feedback? Have you noticed any tweaks or changes since the release of the book? Any feedback from fans or from other magicians?
Yeah, it's been amazing. Actually, I've received several messages, feedback from readers, and it's just been astounding. I'd have to say some of the latest feedback that I've received has touched me deeply because it's come from people that I know personally that have known me and my wife for a long time. The lady that married us, she went on a retreat and she read my book, and her feedback was just amazing. It really touched me on a deep level because she found it deeply meaningful and said it was excellent and said it was a gift to the world, and I was just very humbled by that. But it was really amazing to hear. But from people all over the place, their response of when they're reading it, not only the effects it's had on them personally, but how reading it has had almost like independent magical effects on their own. And I found that very fascinating as well, since one of the last spirits that I talked to mentioned the book about, the actual book being a talisman. And I did a ritual with the first one that I received to go out to all the rest of the books. And it's really been interesting that the people that have been reading through it, they've been saying, I've been having a lot of, phenomenon or, things going on as I'm reading it. And I find that has been really interesting as well. But how it's given people perspective, how it's affected their workings and their considerations for not only evocations, but the identity and the workings of the spirits and the angels. It's been amazing. The feedback has been wonderful. And I love hearing about how it's not only affected people, but how it's complemented their own working and their own discoveries and their own experimentation as well.
And this, of course, brings up people who say, grimoire traditionalism is awesome, and I'm so interested, and I just read Frater's book, and I want to try it. And then other people say, well, you can do other things without the grimoire traditionalism. What does tradition mean to you as a grimoiric traditionalist?
Well, when I'm working with a tradition or a practice, something that has gotten recorded or written down, to me, it really is a testament of work that somebody did at some point in time, had enough effect and had enough importance that they recorded it, and they usually spent a lot of time meticulously recording certain steps, the invocations, the entire process. It was enough for them that writing it down, how they did things, was important. most of these grimoires coming, if not all of them, coming from other sources, from other magicians, from other things that they read. But given any manuscript, a lot of these magical books are from practicing magicians, people that learned what they did, transcribed what they did, and practiced from it. And a lot of those people wrote the way that they did it, the way that they developed their own practice down. So when I'm talking about a tradition, or when I'm considering magical tradition in this way, I'm really giving honor and pause that, I never met these people personally. They come from different cultures, from way different times, different spiritual considerations, all sorts of things. But making any presumptions about what they thought and why they did what they did, I think, is not only erroneous, but it's a little bit missing the beauty and the importance of the work that they actually did. So that when I go and I begin a magical work from a tradition, I try to honor it the best I can, trying to understand why is it they did what they did, and the elements that they included. And instead of just guessing at that in hypothetical ways or just mentally, I put myself in that situation by repeating the process, by taking the experiment and matching it as closely as I can. So in that any alterations that come from that will become from direct practice, from direct experience. And for me, it gives me a very important sense of honoring, if I'm practicing, from something, that I'm giving the honor, I'm giving the time and attention that these previous magicians did, and that I can work from that instead of jumping ahead. So it's not just about the results. It's not just about trying to get something out of a spirit or just get something out of the work. The process itself is an important methodology. It's an important practice for me, that I take my time and that I put my attention in the details. And for me, it also shows that what I'm doing is serious, that it's deserving of the attention, of the time, of sometimes the headaches, of the frustrations of trying to put things together and to actually repeat, these lengthy experiments that magicians did in the past.
Does honoring the text and the requirements and the procedure, does that also feed into the devotional aspect that I know yourself and Aaron Leach and others say is so important to achieving a kind of connection? Does it help achieve that devotional aspect by honoring the tradition?
It definitely does. And to make a connection, speaking about martial arts, when I'm trying to explain this to other people, I always use martial arts as kind of a comparative contrast, so to speak, wherein I teach a very traditional Japanese martial art. A lot of the words, a lot of the phrases, I still use the Japanese. When I go into the dojo, I bow formally and I dress in this gi, and we practice in this very traditional way. We learn modern applications with some modern weapons, some other things, but if we're comparing it to magic, are all those formalities, are all those old etiquette and ways of practicing needed to learn how to fight well? And the answer is no. But people are coming in there, and the people that stay under me and continue to learn, they're learning something more than just fighting well, learning how to defend themselves. They're getting something else out of it. They're connecting to a very deep tradition. They're connecting to a line of people that came before them. They're connecting to a very deep reservoir of spiritual, of mental, of struggle from people long before, but people that have prevailed, people that have brought certain knowledge up to a certain point. And even on an unconscious level, I think these people are connecting to this. So this honoring of this tradition of taking your time, being present when you enter the dojo. So when I'm putting on a uniform, it's not because I feel badass because I'm wearing this gi with the black belt and everything, but I'm coming in there, I'm bowing, I'm changing, because on several levels, I'm telling myself and I'm telling the world that this time is different. This is not like everything else. I'm taking some time out to learn something special, to do something special, to do something unique. This is a time that is unique and deserves attention. It deserves to be honored and given a particular place in my life. So when I'm learning, my mind is focused in a certain way that allows the rest of the things that I do, work, family, and other things to kind of take a temporary back seat to go to the side so that I can really focus on something unique, what I'm doing at that time. And honoring and going into that tradition is a way to really absorb myself in what I'm doing and to appreciate as much as I can all of the people that came before me and all of the work, all of the knowledge that was gained, all of the struggle that it took to get there. And for me, that's something that I can definitely feel when I'm practicing magical evocation as well, even though I came at this a lot by myself. It's like I can feel that lineage. I can feel all of that energy from before coming up and joining me at that time. And even before I started putting voice to that, it's interesting that Archangel Cassiel spoke about that as well. And it's nice to kind of give that honor. There's a lot of magic going on there even before the spirit arrives.
Frater, for someone who might be listening to this and saying, well, shoot, I just can do an evocation, or I just want to do an evocation in jeans and a t-shirt, you would say, well, that's cool, but there might be an element of honoring the tradition and the history and all of the energy, whether on the astral or here in Malkuth, that is just pushing everything constantly, that someone might be missing out on some of that.
Yeah, I think it really has to go into a consideration of not only what you're doing, but why, and who you are. And if all the regalia, the vestments and the wands, if all that is sort of a consideration, well, for like, well, people do that to feel more powerful or to, just simply get their mind in the right place. If that's kind of what they're convinced of what that stuff is for, then yeah, those things are not going to be necessary. They're not going to have any kind of real intended impact on their practice. And it's not that evocation cannot be done, without these things. Of course it can. But again, just like, the martial arts, you don't have to wear gi, you don't have to say or do any of that stuff to learn how to fight well. But that's not the point. It's just like priests, and people who seriously have a spiritual calling to do these kind of things. They don't need the robes and everything to stand up there. But hopefully if their mind is in the right place when they do put on those robes, it's not about feeling authoritative or feeling in power, especially above other people. Quite the opposite. It should have a different effect. It takes time. Especially if it's something that you do a lot, putting on these robes and going through these motions, very time consuming. But if you're doing something with intentionality and trying to stay in the present, that each one of these things is done with a purpose of devotion, of saying, this time is different. This time is important, and I'm not here just to get what I want. I'm here because I'm doing a practice in life that is extremely sacred, extremely important, and not just for my own benefit, not just, so I can get stuff. This is something that is a very moving, spiritual, and important time for me. So every act is an act of devotion, getting to this point in evocation. And I suppose I was highly influenced by the Japanese training because it really goes back to the East. I mean, if you look at that culture and the way that they do things, they can make tea and they could just sit down and have tea. But within that culture is developed taking even the most seemingly mundane things and making it a very, very attentive practice. Everything is meticulous. Everything is very present in what they are doing. Everything has meaning. Not everybody has a practice that way, but for me it's important because when I'm able to do even the simplest things with meaning and attention, it's a way for me to live on purpose instead of just being distracted and looking forward to the next big thing. And that could even be the next big thing of waiting for the spirit to appear. If that's all my mind and everything is concentrating on, or maybe the results. I need that money and stuff. I don't really care about all the stuff. If I can at least make the spirit appear and stuff and get what I want, all that stuff is, whatever. But magic is this discipline for me. It is this love of attention, of doing things with intentionality, with purpose, and with awareness of what I'm doing. And that is a major reason why I practice the way that I practice. It's not because it is the only way, just because it's written down in this grimoire that it's gospel and that it can only work that way. It's just developed into a certain kind of consideration of what I feel this practice has become for me over time.
The aspect of mindfulness, and specifically time and the right place, that's like saturated throughout most of grimoiric literature. I mean, you think of the Heptameronic circle, for example, where it's not, later on today that you're doing an evocation, or it's sunset, or tomorrow, or yesterday. It is right now, in this magical hour, with this angel of the hour, with this angel of the day, in this season, with this specific occult name for the sun, and this specific occult name for the moon. And it's literally, you're stepping into this infinity of the moment. Can you just talk about how, for people who might not be thinking about that mindfulness aspect, that a lot of the grimoire texts are literally all about the right time and the right place?
Beyond anything, that I could say about, what people should be thinking about, these timings and learning these astrological hours and which spirits are ruling each, going back to simple religions and everything across the world that have these holidays and acknowledging of the seasons. The Celtic Fesh, it's been around from Samhain in October, moving all the way around with these considerations, even to the Christian holidays that eventually got associated with different saint days and these kind of things. Celebrations are interesting when you're looking at them, because if you're paying attention, it's just another way to acknowledge being present in a certain amount of time. Even though seasons become cyclical, they can seem very, similar from one year to the next and everything. We have to really appreciate moments in time which are dealing with the present and being mindful as things pass. And I think, especially in our own culture, a lot of that is avoided. A distraction is thought that there's a lot of nervousness, there's a lot of apprehension about lingering too long in any present moment. And it's very interesting these days, because definitely classical magic really speaks to the opposite of that. It demands focus and attention during very specific times. Evocation itself, a practice when you're preparing and getting ready for a certain hour. If your mind, attention, and focus is anywhere else except at that moment, there's going to be a lot missed, if not the complete experiment going faulty, because you're not able to really, really place yourself in that moment and connect with the energies and the spirits of that moment, which is what that practice is all about. Learning not only the times and the hours, but the directions, and preparing oneself to encounter a certain spirit, a certain energy at a particular time, at a particular place and direction, and working towards that. And like you said, it's something that is prepared up to, but when you're in the midst of that, it's got to be all together, and that includes your attention. And there's a lot there, and that's part of the beauty of the grimoire, because if you don't prepare for that, if you're not doing the work for that, if you try to jump ahead, most likely something is going to go wrong, something's not going to connect, and it's not going to line up the way where the spirit's going to arrive correctly, and arrive in a way where you can perceive and exchange with them properly, if those things are not met. So dealing with that part of the technology of classical evocation, I think, is really important to appreciate the fullness of how evocation can come into play and be completed successfully.
At the same time, it's the height of structure and kind of following the tradition. When you step in the circle, it immediately becomes the height of pure flow, pure expression, and irrationality, in the most positive context, that it just goes beyond all human comprehension. When you first started ceremonial magic, did you kind of instinctually feel a kind of paradox, or did it all just kind of, when you stepped in the circle, it all made sense?
It definitely was a time of practice, and what I mean by that is, I think I had to go through the motions a couple times, or really get a feel for the procedure and the practice, and getting to that part where it became natural. It wasn't so much of a mental process doing everything, where I really did understand the procedure, and each part flowed a little bit more naturally, until that point where the invocation was going on, and it was not a mental exercise. It was not something that was rational at all, like you say. It was something that you're completely caught up in the moment, and it's just going. And I think the late Dr. Lewinsky, when he talked about this rapture and thing that starts to build when you go into, you're one with your word. What you're saying is what's going on at the same time. You're not thinking about it. You're not, as reading from a book anymore, even if you have the book with you. It's something that you're completely in the moment on. And what you're saying, every single word, is what is going on. And especially as the spiritual energy arrives, and they're there, and this phenomenon is going on. Like you said, you're not thinking. I can't remember one time when that was going on where I even remembered I was in robes. There were times where it was going on that I didn't even know my scryer was there. I didn't consider it was not something I was thinking about. The circle, the procedure, the entire thing was not something that was present in my mind. It's definitely one of those moments that you're completely present. It's an amazing experiment. It's an amazing experience to be able to witness something like that. And it's very natural. It flows exactly as it does, and you are in the present. But I think that's what the grimoires and these practices are gearing the person up for. You're practicing these invocations, you're making these tools, you're doing all this thing, and hopefully becoming familiar with them enough where the experiment goes smoothly, it goes naturally, because it's very easy to get swept up and completely forget the purpose of why you were there, what you're doing, and what the original goal was. And I think all of those elements helps the act of evocation complete and go through successfully, because you have to come to a point where you are completely present, but you're still there with a purpose. You still are able to perform and do what you need to do. And it's not so much as a mental and a rational thing as it becomes second nature. It becomes a practice that you're adept at. It's something that you do naturally. So the exchange with the spirit happens in this more kind of organic way, but it's through a training. It's through a practice that you've integrated, rather than just kind of trying to do it, on the fly without having any kind of solid ground beneath your feet. And this is where the tradition kind of comes in. So yeah, it is very paradoxical when the actual event is taking place, but at the same time it's very natural when it occurs.
Letting go of the modern day distractions, everything, the neurotic behaviors, the smartphones, getting out of your own way. Can you just talk about how, for someone who doesn't really think in that direction, that it's pretty vital, to do that? It
definitely is. It's important to be able to access your mind and have control over it when needed. And what I mean by that is getting all of those distractions and having them completely out of the way, and especially in evocation. And that is also the thirst and the lust for results, the worry that is always there, even with experienced magicians, even myself, letting that completely go. Well, what if it doesn't work this time? What if I messed up? I wasn't quite, in my groove during this part of, the preparatory work, or whatever that may be. Everything has to get out of the way. And then all that stuff is that mental chatter. And people who have not trained that part of their mind, that can be very difficult. But it is essential, I think, to accomplish not only evocation, but probably some of the more dynamic accomplishments in life. That part needs to be accessed so that completely pure and focused attention can turn into expression and do exactly what it needs to do. So in the martial arts side, this connects to a concept of sanmitsu, which is this triple secret. And basically what that entails is that there's no division, hurdle, or even a connector between thought, word, and deed. So what you're thinking, what you're saying, what you're doing is manifesting, and there's nothing between those concepts, those words, and what that entails. And to be able to do that, I think that that does take some practice. That really does take some training of the mind, and also really knowing and accepting what you're doing at that time without any kind of distraction. And that can be difficult for people. But that's part of what this art entails, for sure. As a second point, just something to bounce it off the martial art aspect is as well. The students come in and they train with models, and ironically, there's earth, water, fire, wind, and these elemental kind of ideals express themselves in physical actions and techniques that we do. But there's also the fifth element, which is ku, is also understood as void, and this void is the complete emptiness and or the whole potentiality of all of these four elements. And I think being able to get into that ku, that complete emptiness, that void, or that pure potentiality, is basically what is aimed at for this time as well.
That kind of reminds me, Frater, of someone you referenced, Dr. Lasuski, talking about in Ceremonial Magic and the Power of Evocation. Even though these are objective beings, during the ceremonial act of evocation or invocation itself, the beings themselves use the altered state of consciousness or the mind, quote unquote, of the operator as a kind of bridge to cross into this world via the altered state of consciousness, all the right elements humming at the right time, the physical things. Did you find that, Frater, that even though these beings are objective, that you also felt that it was actually your own state and all of the work up to that point that kind of formed the bridge that allowed this to happen?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the spirit definitely does its part on its side, however that works. But we make no mistake that these are spiritual beings, which means that they don't look like anything. They don't have any fixed position, especially physically, of being somewhere at some place. So even when they appear solid and almost like another being right in front of you, this is definitely a very foreign aspect for them, even more so for us than anything else, because we're talking about, I mean, it's pretty cheesy, but energy, a frequency, an intelligence that is formless and not restricted by time or space the way that we understand it. So there is this very paradoxical, this very dynamic and somewhat difficult struggle that takes place when that visibility, where that concentrated being is, a lot of it is located right there in front of you. So there's a lot of effort, and I think it's part of that divine connection that we have as magicians when we're able to put ourselves in that state. It basically takes us out of our usual understanding of time and space. The concept of the circle, of even the magical chamber of time, is sometimes it feels like it happens in a second. Sometimes it feels like I'd been living in the circle for a very long time. It's amazing. But I really do think there is some separation, some break that happens there, and the spirit is able to meet during and in that place, where otherwise it wouldn't be possible. And it's such a powerful component for actual evocation. And it's much different than kind of just a mental exercise or an astral viewing just on your side that takes place. So yes, being able to meet those elements and come to that point is what allows them to come forth and to really be there in a very powerful and dynamic way.
Can you talk, Frater, a little bit about this concept of a spiritual moderator when it comes to exploring the grimoire tradition and in the midst of an evocation or an invocation? Some people might think that a spiritual moderator is some kind of familiar, or maybe it's the HGA from the Abramelin operation, it's some kind of higher self. But you've written extensively about what you think, based on your experience, this spiritual moderator is and what role it plays in magic. Can you kind of share a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So through my earlier experimentation with not only evocation, but various spirit calling things or trying to get people involved in spiritual or magical experiences, I found that there does seem to be something there, and I wasn't quite sure exactly what it was, and it's still up for debate, even in my own head. But when I would guide people, if I would either use hypnosis or magical ritual for them to have a spiritual experience, even if they were very interested, they were very excited, sometimes there was a block. They would close down, or when they would come out of it, it would be very disturbing for them, and they would forget. They'd have the details, but it would be like waking up from a dream, where they have that amnesia that happens sometimes after waking up from a dream. It would be like the brain, even on their end, of not being able to quite integrate or absorb the experience of being able to encounter or converse, exchange with a spiritual being successfully. And I always thought that was very interesting. So that was kind of my initial impressions on something being there. And at first it just seemed like it was the person's own mind. But it also happens that I've noticed that there have been profound spirit appearings in various times to people quite spontaneously. And some people are able to perceive it, and some people are not. And it's very interesting to see how that happens. And I've noticed that within this world, and I always say the occult remains the occult no matter the technological age, the exchange of information, and there's some things do stay hidden to people because they're just not able to perceive it, not able to concentrate on it properly, not able to really make the connections of whatever that is to be able to perceive these things. And it seems like there is another intelligence that seems to have some control with that as well. It really keeps people who are not really supposed to be in this world away, just through kind of from their own reactions to it. And I was never quite sure about who that would be. Was it a personal spirit for the person, that it just wasn't their time yet in their lifetime to be able to perceive these things? Was there something else going on? I think this idea of the spiritual moderator even developed further when I spoke to the cardinal kings, these spirits that really do seem to have as their function the allowance of not only what sort of spirits are able to exchange with humans or make impacts on the physical world in a visible way, so to speak, but also how closely and how dynamically that interaction takes place for various people at various times in certain situations. And it's been very interesting speaking with them about how this happens, where they really are guardians of a gateway, and it seems to be this energetic allowance or disallowance about how these things affect, almost into a degree, capacity. You could really see that with some of these more powerful beings, that if they did have free reign, or if they were able to really have their own way in the physical world, that it would be quite disturbing. Not only for people, but even for the environment, so to speak. So it's very interesting to kind of see and to experience that. So I'm not quite exactly sure if it's one overall entity, or if it's a lot of these beings through the angels, through the the demonic four cardinal rulers, and how they moderate things. But it does all seem to work together a lot more than people would guess. I mean, sometimes things happen and it seems chaotic, but the more interaction I have with these beings, the more it really does seem like a network, like a matrix of there's a lot of checks and balances and controls about how these influences are able to relate and exchange with human beings.
That is fascinating. And from what you're saying, it sounds like this moderating force goes both ways. So there might be a magician who's really trying to get in there, trying to do as much as they can, but that moderating force is saying either you're not ready yet, or it's going to be a diminished kind of result or experience. But then on the other side, as you just said, it's also moderating the other spiritual forces themselves, which if they were not moderated or controlled, it could lead to disastrous, kind of like a Pandora's box kind of throughout the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think John Dee had touched on that with his system as well. I mean, there really are gateways. There's certain kind of powers, almost, I want to say, certain initiations that you have to go through. Initiations with spirits, definitely, to be in their proximity, to be able to unlock. It really did feel like when we were encountering them, they changed something in the way that our minds worked, the way that our perceptions worked, the way that we were able to perceive things, so that we could keep going, so that we could speak with these next beings. And especially with the process with my scryer night through gateways through light and shadow, that was an underlying theme that we were very much aware of. We didn't know exactly how it worked or how it was working within us, but through each of these contexts, through each of these processes, it seemed that, when we had this successful working, we were able to do something more or go to another spirit or do something else that we wouldn't have been able to do until we had that experience. There was no forcing past it. There was no jumping ahead. It really was being allowed to go through another doorway, have access to another realm that would not have been accessible otherwise.
That is fascinating, Frater, because I remember when Aaron Leach and Rufus Opus were on the podcast talking about this, one of the questions that got brought up was, if I'm just starting out in ceremonial magic and I'm really putting in all this effort and I really want to have a successful magical engagement with these spirits, what is the best thing to do when it comes to a first ceremonial evocation? And the concept of familiars got brought up, about you need a spirit that can help you attract or bind, whatever terminology you use, other spirits. And I'm curious to get your take on this, because something Aaron mentioned was that in general there are these kind of two broad camps of two different routes that one could go on a broad level. One route being the kind of solar aspect spirits that can just, if there's a celestial kingdom metaphor, they can just walk right into the celestial palace and they can interact on behalf of the magician with the divine spirits and engage in requests, and it's a very straightforward aspect. And the other is the more familiar mercurial aspect, which is a little bit sneakier. It's a little bit more, sneaky's not the right word, but it's just a little bit more mercurial. It's a little bit more, subtle and engaging. I guess for people out there, Frater, who might be wondering, okay, I'm putting in all this effort, I really want to make sure I do it right. What advice would you have for them in terms of, should they aim for engaging with a spirit that can help with familiars? Should they go for something more solar? I mean, what kind of advice would you have for people first doing it?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because I work with clients and people who come to speak with me one-on-one, wishing to improve their magical practice, or really want to get to the point basically where I am with evocation, or having an exchange with spirits. For a lot of them, they become frustrated because they speak to all sorts of different authorities, including myself, and everybody seems to have kind of a different answer. And this is one of the dilemmas, especially for people starting out in the magical world or starting out with interest in evocation. There's so much information out there, so many people saying different things and giving, different advice and this kind of thing, where it seems like a whirlwind. The same kind of dilemma is caught up with a lot of people who have been at this for a while, but they're kind of what are known as armchair magicians. And the reason being not that they're lazy, is because the deeper that they dig into the grimoires and these, the manuscripts, they're always looking for like a pure source. You're like, oh, well, this, I'm working from this grimoire. Well, this comes from earlier manuscripts and this, that, and, they do things differently, and, the source was changed. And I was telling a client about this the other day, is, if they're looking for something pure, they're never going to find it, because it's human. It was written by people. And even the most powerful magicians who have these interactions with spirits, including myself, it is through the filter of a person, a singular person. And I don't try to get too blown up in my own head and ego that, even though it's amazing and it's life-changing for me and has inspired a lot of people, it's still come through my own filter, my own perceptions, my own ability to understand, comprehend, and apply things that are going on in my own life. It's not going to be universal. It's not going to be perfect for everyone, pure source. And my sources, of course, have come from these magicians past, and even people that do things very differently than I do. With this frustration, if they're looking for something on how to practice, they really have to decide on something and just practice. And even if it's not giving them these explosive results, to keep going at it. And they have to really compare it to other skills. You can take any Olympic sport out there, and there's all these different coaches, and people are coming together on similar methods that seem successful, for their athletes, but everybody's going to do something a little bit different. But even people that are skillful, they didn't come doing it, try something once, and then all of a sudden they're amazing at it. It's practice. They have to do it. You really do have to do it and be solid on that, and not waver or get distracted and go on to something else, when it's not giving you the results you want right away. And I think that's a big dilemma, especially for Westerners in the age of distraction. They're excited by the prospects, the possibilities, and the promises of what these magical arts can do, but they try it once and give it their best shot, and it's not doing what they expected and what they were fantasizing about. So they abandon it, or something else kind of strikes their interest. And when I tease about the New Age, this is what I'm talking about, the New Age. And the New Age it's got a fad, every microsecond. It's, going from Stonehenge, and all of a sudden, the pyramids, and then, the crystals on top of that, but that's not really it. It's actually the chakras, and it's just a mess, and people are just drawn to all of these things. And the people who are masters, that are actually adepts of any tradition, and the people that I respect, even the people that do things way different than I do, the people who I give respect to and that I give acknowledgement to, or people who have been doing a practice, even if it's developing in it. Of course, there's going to be alterations, but it's still a practice that has a foundation. They're doing their same work, and they've been doing it for a while. And these are the people that, even through the plateaus or through the times where it's really not working, the way that they want, or they're having challenges in their life, they keep going. These are the masters, and these are the people that, hey, even if you don't learn from me, learn from people like this, people that have been doing the work, and they've been doing it a while. And yes, they have something to show for it. They may not be celebrities or, these millionaires and everything, but they are making it work, and they're continuing to do their work despite any kind of challenges that show up. And overall, without getting into specifics, this is what I recommend for people. If they're not sure, I'm like, does this grimoire call to you? Yes, but this, person says this and that. And I would say you need to stop talking to them. You need to focus. If you're going to do this work, do it. Don't try to look, grasp at all these straws and look to all these professionals and everything. Pour your mind, pour your attention and your effort into this. Do it, and do it for a while. And then after that, and as you start experimenting and everything, and really put significant time and effort into it, then start branching out and start, getting advice or looking into other things. But I think you really need a foundation. And usually it is a tradition. A tradition gives people a roadmap. It gives them a blueprint. It doesn't mean that it's infallible. It's just a way. But if you truly connect to it, then you've got the backing of all the people, the real people that were successful and were able to make it work before you.
That is such great advice. Such great advice. Magic is effectively the spiritual Olympics. It's where you got to train and train and train. And someone like yourself, Frater, is someone might look at you on the outside and go, oh well, wow, he makes it look so easy or this and that. But that comes from hours and hours and hours and days hammering on your craft. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong. I believe in your first book, Frater, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, you mentioned something like scrying, where for many a night you battled stiff joints, frustrations, nothing's happening, why aren't I getting anything? And this wasn't even with a formal ceremonial act. This was with engaging in scrying. And even something like that, it really is a test of endurance and about pushing through. Is that fair?
For sure. It's something that I tell my students, the people that come to me for learning, for sure, that I tell them to do the same practice. I'm like, if you're doing a magical practice in evocation where you have to scry, then you sit there and look, and if nothing happens and you get frustrated, I'm like, you are learning something. Because if you don't know what it is to hold your posture, to hold your attention, and to stare at something for good lengths of time, well, you're going to learn, practice this, and you need those skills if you're going to do this type of magical practice. And I think people, again, they're not getting the results that they want, so they get discouraged or they get frustrated. But you have to understand that this is the training, this is the practice. If you want to scry and see spirits, then you have to understand what that is like. What is it like to sit there in a darkened room and stare at something, and understand positioning and not having incense, choke you or sting your eyes, or all these things that you don't think about when you're kind of fantasizing about how amazing the process is going to be. There's a lot of variables and a lot of things that go into magical evocation that they take practice, they take getting used to, so that your mind can come to the right place of where these results are going to happen.
Can you kind of talk about this spiritual materialism and spiritual, you could call it lust for results, you could call it jumping from quartz crystals to the pyramids to Stonehenge to the ungodly amount of invitations to join the Illuminati that apparently everyone's getting, which, by the way, I have not gotten one of those. I feel very slighted and very sore-spirited that how come I haven't gotten an amazing invite to the Illuminati, Frater? Come on.
I'm sure it's just a matter of moments. I wouldn't be surprised if you got one when we were done with the podcast here. So.
Oh, no.
They'll be knocking on your door in no time.
When you talk about the shortened attention spans and jumping from this to that, to pyramids, to Stonehenge, to crystal energies, do you think that some of the materialism and some of the insta results, so to speak, that we expect out of modern life, has it just kind of seeped into some or many of the modern occult approaches that we see online, especially?
And for sure, and to be clear, it's not that a lot of these topics or even these aspects that there's no power or quote unquote no truth behind them. It is the idea that for a person, if they want to exhibit any amount of I dare say control, but shall we say engineered or directed manifestation or power and intentionality in their life, that it is important to come with a roadmap, or at least some idea of in which way are you going to express yourself, or in which way are you going to connect to these powers. And it kind of, even if we just narrow it down to the world of evocation, and I know that Aaron Leach and both Rufus Opus, and I love this because it's points that we all agree on for sure, is that talking about these spirits, even the ones in the grimoires that practice or promise these amazing abilities or can grant this or that or, whatever. People think they can conjure them once and they're going to get these granted boons. Like, boom, they're going to happen like this. And that is the fantasy. That is the new agey kind of outlook of how this stuff works. It does not work that way. A lot of these promised powers and the attributes of these spirits' offices, being able to harness those and manifest them in your life, this is the result of working with a singular spirit over a considerable amount of time, where you're working with them continuously, where you know them basically on an intimate level, that how they feel, the way that they communicate. This is something, it is an initiation. It's something that becomes connected with you, even with the circle. The circle, again, being this kind of focusing point for when the spirit does meet you, as much as it is for any kind of protection. You're going into a conversation, a relationship with this being, and through that working, through this active participation of both the spirit and yourself, these are where these amazing attributes are drawn from and come from. These are where, these results that people want can happen. But it's not this instant gratification thing, which I think is very hard, for Westerners. So, yeah, I have people coming to me, asking for this or that. I've been getting a lot of, love and lust, requests, very adamant wants this way, and with people thinking that I can just grant in their own life as if I was one of these spirits. It's kind of interesting taking on that role. And I have to make it very clear that not even so much from just a simple moral standpoint that, no, even with possibilities, because some people have, when I do workings for them, they have instant and amazing effects. But even with those people, I tell them that, be mindful of this. It's great that this is happening, but if this is real, this is something that is going to continue. It's something that's going to develop. It's something that's going to evolve in hopefully a positive way. And if you're wanting more love in your life, if you're wanting more wealth or whatever it is, go beyond the instant gratification. This is something that, for it to be real, for it to be meaningful, for it to actually change your life, it has to change you. It has to change you to some degree. Sometimes that change is difficult, or it's involved, or it takes a while, because our considerations of what we want and what that's going to look like a lot of times are not how things really work. And this is where people get confused with magic, and it's important to really understand that, or it can really turn into that kind of monkey paw type thing, or being careful what you wish for, because it turns out not to be the reality that they were fantasizing about. This is something that I try to communicate to people that come to me, because I like to help people. I like to see these changes go on in their life, but I want to make sure that it's something that is right for them and right for people that are around them as well.
So for everyone listening, no, Frater Ashen Chassan will not book you a lifetime membership on the Love Boat. And this is one of the most fascinating points that I never even thought about this until you mentioned it, that clients or people who approach you are confusing or conflating you with the actual spirit that can eventually, over a long time, confer these things. They're basically saying, hey, you can help me get, money, or you can help me get, love or sex or power. But what you're saying, Frater, is that those things, when it says in the Goetia that such and such a spirit gives good familiars, or can do this with the minerals or gold, that is the result of not stepping in the circle once and poof, like, Aladdin and the magic lamp. It's over, weeks, months, years of developing that relationship. Would that be fair?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. This is the difference between the fantasy consideration of what people think magic and evocation is, and the reality. And sometimes it is difficult that I explain this ahead of times, but I've seen some amazing happenings. I had someone that came to me in desperation that had serious physical chronic ailments, and they'd been to every single doctor and this kind of thing, and nothing would work, and they were coming to me, and I was very clear of, I'm not a miracle worker. I can't heal you. I can conjure this very powerful being that does healing on your behalf, but I'm not going to bind them, first of all, to make them do anything, but I will ask. And after that understanding was brought across, and they seemed to confirm that they did understand, I went through this working, and they had a miraculous recovery. The pain and everything went away, and I was overjoyed to read the responses and feedback, and it was really neat to see this happening. But I still, from the place, like I didn't do the work for whatever reason they chose to, but I've conjured other beings and everything that said, they're going to have to experience and go through this. And there's nothing that, I'm not going to change this no matter how bad the person wants it. And even with this same client that had this amazing recovery, I think it's hard for people because they're coming for me just like, wow, if this person can do this, then they can give me every wish that I've ever wanted. And it's been very interesting having to communicate with people. Like, I'm glad to be of this service and glad to be able to do this kind of work for you. But, be careful, because I do this work, but it's not going to grant you every wish that ever wanted. There's got to be work, and there's a lot of things going on that even my ability to converse and exchange with these spirits, is not just going to make our every wish come true. Although I know that for myself, I've really come to learn to be humble, because there's things that even with my own magical work to make things better in my own life, it's been working out wonderfully, but it looks always looks a lot different than it did in my head initially. And sometimes I even get frustrated. I get really frustrated when it's not matching my expectations. Even after all of my experience and learning, I still make that mistake. So I try to remind people that come to me too that, hey, this stuff is not always match exactly what you imagine it to be.
Someone of your experience who's gone through so many different grimoires, operations, someone who really takes his time and puts in the effort, even someone at your level, when you step in the circle, there might be times when you might have an expectation like, okay, I'm here with my scryer. We've done all the research. We know exactly what kind of spirit we're dealing with. We feel their energies. It's going to be like this. And then in the end, it turns out to be something different. Would that be right?
If I have enough time, I'd love to share a recent experience that I've had recently.
Oh, sure.
Right on that point. With my latest book being out and everything going on, my house spirit, Hiram, directly told me that, hey, you need to start packing things up because today, or not today, but now is a very good time. There's going to be a move. You're going to be moving, and it's going to be a much bigger place. You're going to be, able to sell and get into a really great, house, and now's the time to do it. So I was at that point when I was speaking to him, I was like, wow, that's a big thing. I didn't think we were in this space to move. So that was a lot of, kind of trust going on my house spirit that I would, consider doing something like that. But every advice and every conversation that we had and advice that he had given me had been amazing. So I definitely trusted him, and I began packing things up. And ironically, our realtor just checked in with us on the phone, and I mentioned, hey, we were thinking about moving. She was like, okay, start cleaning things up. And it happened very quickly. Selling the house, it sold in 2 hours when we put it on the market. It went for $25K, way above asking price, and everything was working beautifully, just like magic. And I was very excited, and probably getting a bit spoiled too by that time. And it was coincidentally, my house spirit was a very good teacher as well, was like, you're going to have to pack up the vessel as well, the skull as well. And immediately felt apprehension, and I was like, whoa, I just thought I could put you someplace safe and then take you out when so I could keep talking to you every night, because I've been talking to him every single day, every single night since that operation, of being able to bring him into there. And he's like, no, this is important. You need to do this, and this is how you do this, and you're going to go through an episode of change. This is going to be an important growing experience for you. And I was like, okay. So I was pretty nervous and not all that excited, but I was still following the advice. So we went through this thing, and I went through a very, very taxing period where I wasn't talking to him, which I was getting very used to having his voice, his coaching, his inspiration, like every single day. I was starting to rely upon that, and then it was not there. And then the house finding process became very difficult. We found a place that, I was sure this was it, is this, sign, and all these things were lining up, and it fell through, and I ended up, I was investing already a lot of money and everything to get in this new place, and it didn't work out. And I started becoming, even after all his fantastic advice and everything, a little bit doubtful and a little bit irritated. And even my wife was like, whoa, don't. She became the person in good faith, where I was starting to get a little frustrating, which was ridiculous for a person in my with my experience and my standing. It was very silly for me to get into this point, but I had gotten used to things really, really working out, just how I had intended it or whatever I was working for. So I was even doing magic for this kind of house and moving forward. It took 3 months, and we were really running low. We were actually homeless because our house sold and those people wanted to move in. We had to stay with my folks for a little bit, and we still did not have our house. But it was a testing point, and it was very interesting having to go through this kind of uncertainty and going, okay, this was told that this would work out. This is definitely not how I imagine it, having to struggle and worry. We looked at house after house after house, 20 houses probably, before finally finding the one, and it's interesting. It got put up on the market. We were the first ones to look at it. We put a bid, and everything worked out perfectly when we got it. But it was a testing point for me, and it was a very interesting place to be because all of my magical implements were packed away. I'd packed everything away as instructed. I didn't have wand, book, Hiram, nothing. Everything was in storage and non-accessible. I was definitely a fish out of water. It was a very trying point. I got very ill. I caught pneumonia during that episode. I got very sick. I'd never had pneumonia, never been that. That was the most ill I'd ever been in my life. Very interesting time for me, but very needed. And then when I finally got into the new place and got Hiram back out, that conversation did bring me to tears, and it was very humbling. But it really put in perspective how blessed I am, for one, to have access to that, but to two, that you can't take away the human element and the need to be able to push through struggles, to push through conflicts, and to be able to, not only work with spirits, but to not rely everything, upon them, so that you can still keep things in perspective. It was very interesting that way. So it kind of set me in a very much needed place, I think.
So amazing. Just such a beautifully, honest account. I really hope our listeners will benefit from hearing that. And for some reason, Frater, when you were mentioning your story, I thought, especially with you getting ill, I thought of Abraham von Worms, of the Abramelin tradition. When he was recounting his journeys, even before and after meeting Abramelin, there was a period of intense sickness, and he was sick. And this is after having all of the teachings, the entire teachings of Abramelin, but still having to travel a lot, having to really not have a home because he's trying to get back home to Europe after being in Egypt with Abramelin the Mage. And it's just so fascinating to hear your story about really something that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but does it also echo your at this point, very famous blog post, 9 Days to the Night, where you detail your first goetic attempt, where there was, and your very, very first attempt, you did everything, you made all the preparations, and it was still such a trying time because there were no results, there was no manifestation, you just walked out of the circle, and you had to push through that. You had to really tackle that doubt and that fear and really push through that. Are those two things related in terms of just being able to just kind of hammer through?
Definitely. I think everyone that I respect and every quote unquote master that I look up to or acknowledge has gone through a period of trial. There's no one that is, once they meet their success, they find their hilltop and they just sit up there and everything's fantastic, for the rest of their existence. So these trials and these times, I think, are the crucible, are the deeper alchemy of living and existence and reforming ourselves. I mean, we really have to go through periods of times to really change, to really re-examine where we are, what we're doing, and our purpose, identity, all those things. And a lot of times they have to be brought to our attention in a very dynamic way. And that definitely was for me as well. And it's a way to, it definitely keeps me humble as well, but it also puts things into perspective to really acknowledge and appreciate life and the experience and living purposefully, attentively, living on purpose, and really acknowledging that, each moment, getting back to our earlier conversations, it had been a while since I'd been in the circle and in the midst of the energies of these incredible beings. It's definitely a high point. It's a huge high, and I was going there over and over again. It was an amazing experience, but there's a time of pause. Well, when you're not there and enough time goes in between and everything, it's amazing what the mind does, or what people do change, life circumstances, things change. And I think when that world was kind of pulled away from me for a bit, I really had to deal with that, to look at things and re-examine myself and what I was doing in the world from that standpoint before I could go back to it in, I guess, a very much needed way. And that's hopefully something as the next challenge and such rolls around, that I think it's the people that push through that and that are transformed in a purposeful way, that they do come out better. Unfortunately, not everything that doesn't kill us makes us better people. Unfortunately, you see, I wish that were true, but it's not. You can see the examples of that. So in the midst of trial, maybe in the famous part of the HGA of let me not shrink in the hour of my trial, of whatever that may be, being able to push through this. It doesn't mean that you look powerful, that you look prettier, that you look ideal. It's usually very humbling, but I think the way that we allow ourselves to get transformed and who we become and who we choose to be from that point on is what the true purpose is, where the real magic comes into focus.
Frater, do you find that this concept of struggle and pushing through and kind of battling there's this concept of, especially in Gnosticism, of light and darkness, and especially with your involvement in the Gnostic approach, do you find that aspect of carrying and pushing through in ceremonial magic, does that carry over into your deep involvement in the Gnostic approach to everything?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as far as the Gnostic aspect, or at least my consideration of what that is and what that means is different. Whereas I see this kind of conflict, some of these battles, as being a very much needed thing. Everything you're deciding to live in the proverbial greenhouse is one way to go through life, but it's not the way that I choose to. But being able to redefine ourselves and to recreate ourselves is an important way to evolve as people, both spiritually, physically, and every other way, mentally as well, so that there's always change and there's always conflict. And it's something that has to be considered and understood, I think, in life. And for some people, it gets overwhelming, and some people don't get respite from that, and it becomes difficult. But I think when it's able to be managed and given its proper and due attention, that these are the elements that we have to work through to actually become masterful in anything that we're choosing to do. And when people are going through struggles and everything, being able to, instead of it just looking at a good bad kind of thing, being able to really look at it as a learning mode or some place to really transform yourself. That's where you see the people that come out of these situations as much more amazing people. It's simply coming from a different perspective, a different consideration about what's happening to them and why. And when you're in the midst of it, it's extremely difficult. But being able to take each moment, or when you're starting to get on the other side of that and really give it the space that it deserves, makes a big difference, I think, of what people are when they come out on the other side of things.
I know there are listeners out there who are going to be asking, Frater Ashen Chassan, he always has something going on. So what is coming up on the horizon? Are there any upcoming projects, areas of occult interest, anything coming up that you think that you can share or talk about? Or is there anything else that you would like the listeners to know about going forward?
Well, I've always got quite a few things on the burners and such, but lately, especially when I get my room completely situated and I've got my place for practice back up, I'm very much interested in exploring some of these ancient and almost source works of evocation from sources like the Hygromantia. Very much interested in some of these earlier practices of evocation and how those work out. I've made some interesting new discoveries that I plan on sharing and going over in some of my workshops. So I'm hoping people in attending will find that interesting, because I know there will be some experienced magicians going to these workshops that I'm putting on. So I'm excited to possibly share some new or reconsidered information that I have not come across yet, or other people really talking about. So I'm excited going to that. But before divulging or going into the details of that, I want to be able to put a lot of things to practice and do some more research to see what has merit and what I can gain from it. But besides that, another fascinating topic that I hope to get back in now that I'm back into conversation with my house spirit is that some of our earlier conversations when he wasn't going over things directly going on in my life, he was sharing his history and how he got to be where he got, and eventually, speaking with me in this vessel, and his story and the things that he shown and was also written down by my wife as I was relating it back to her, kind of being the scryer at that point, has just turned into an amazing story. And I'm trying to figure out how I want to present it. Do I want to do it, kind of almost in a novel form where it reads just like, a story as he was kind of telling it, and go on it that way. But I'm hoping that I can complete those conversations with him to get his story through the way that he's telling it me, because it's really been fascinating to be able to hear it from his point of view.
Wow, that is a book and a podcast in and of itself, Frater. That and all of the amazing findings that you're researching. Oh, there's so many great irons in the fire. Absolutely. Frater Ashen Chassan, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time as always and coming on the podcast today. Just blessings to you, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Glitch Bottle Podcast and helping us uncork the uncommon this fine day or night or wherever you happen to occupy space-time in your occult lairs, your summoning towers, or your cloistered libraries of the esoterically awesome. You can check out previous episodes and other magical Glitch Bottle news on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, and subscribe and download free episodes anytime on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and on Spreaker.com. Just search Glitch Bottle and enjoy. Also, please make sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at Glitch Bottle, all one word. Our intro music is the track Tornado by David Zeste. Our magical interest is fueled by sincerity, passion, amazing guests, and a copious amount of clinking coffee cups. Until next time, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.